Congressman from Pennsylvania, Chris DeLuzio. He's an Iraq war veteran and a member of the Armed Services Committee. And Congressman, you were one of those co-sponsors to that bipartisan war powers resolution, saying it is the responsibility of Congress to authorize declaring war. The president did not get authorization before launching these strikes on Iran. What is your reaction to where we stand right now?
Congress didn't authorize this. No president of any party has the ability on their own to start a war. Sending American aircraft over another country dropping bombs, that's risking starting a war, and certainly the Congress has a role to play. I hope more of my Republican colleagues join us to stand up for the American people. I'm a veteran of the war in Iraq. I remember what that debate was. At least there was a debate. I think they got it wrong then. We've had no chance to have a debate, to present evidence to the American people, to see the case the administration is making for why they should authorize these.
Leaned on a specific maneuver, using emergency declarations to bypass Congress, I swear. The way this week unfolded on Capitol Hill felt like watching a storm everyone insisted wasn't coming, until the sky finally split open. One moment, everything seemed routine. The familiar partisan battle lines, the recycled talking points, the same tired posturing. Then, without warning, senators began breaking ranks in ways no one saw coming. You could feel the atmosphere change, like Washington finally hit a pressure point it had been avoiding for years. And the real shock wasn't simply that Trump suffered a loss. It was how it happened, who made it happen, and what it suggests about where things may be headed next. When senators who have spent years shielding Trump suddenly vote to block one of his signature powers, that's not a minor deviation. That's a rupture you can't dismiss. That's what set the city buzzing, not just the vote itself, but the sense that something larger, something more fundamental, may have just started to unravel. Here's the part most people missed. This wasn't a policy spat. It wasn't an arcane fight over trade formulas or tariff percentages. This was a battle over presidential power, who holds it, who limits it, and whether Congress is finally willing to reclaim authority it has surrendered for decades. That's why this moment feels so charged. It isn't really about tariffs. It's about control. And that's where things start to get interesting. Trump's tariff strategy has always. He used that playbook repeatedly during his first term, and it gave him enormous leverage. Trump could slap tariffs on almost anyone, label it a national security issue, and dare Congress to stop him. For years, they didn't. Even Republicans who despised tariffs, and there were plenty, mostly stayed quiet, because crossing Trump was political suicide. This time was different. The Senate finally said no. Not quietly. Not behind closed doors. They voted. 51 senators, including 4 Republicans, moved to revoke the national emergency that allowed Trump to impose those tariffs. That vote matters. It's binding. It strips real power away from the executive branch, and that almost never happens. What makes this moment even more striking is who crossed the line. Seeing Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski break with Trump isn't exactly shocking. They've done it before. But Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, those names change the entire equation. McConnell has spent his career shielding Republican presidents, even when he disagreed with them privately. For him to step out in the open is a signal. And when Rand Paul calls the emergency madness, that's not political theater. That's a conservative libertarian flatly accusing Trump of crossing a constitutional line.
Calls to impeach the president. Democratic Congressman Al Green of Texas made the impassioned plea on the House floor last night, arguing that no one, not even the president, is above the law.
I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to call for the impeachment of the President of the United States of America for obstruction of justice. I do not do this for political purposes, Mr. Speaker. I do this because I believe in the great ideals that this country stands for. This is about my position. This is about what I believe. And this is where I stand. I will not be moved. The president must be impeached. I am a voice in the wilderness, but I assure you that history will vindicate me. I assure you that...
Most people don't realize this, but senators don't make moves like that on a whim. They test the waters. They study the polls. They consult donors. They read the political room carefully. When lawmakers finally break with a president from their own party, it usually means one thing. They believe that president is losing clout, or losing the ability to punish them. That's the part analysts have been quietly focusing on all week. Not just the vote itself, but the psychology behind it. And here's the twist. While all of this was unfolding, another political earthquake was taking shape. Democrats introduced a resolution that directly confronts Trump's rhetoric about using the death penalty against political opponents. This wasn't coded language. It wasn't something you had to read between the lines. Trump explicitly stated that 6 Democratic veterans, people with military service, had engaged in conduct punishable by death. That wording landed like a grenade. Members of Congress understand exactly what it implies. They hear the extremism in it. And in Washington, once something like that is said out loud, you can't just take it back. So Democrats responded with Senate Resolution 486. And in plain terms, it forces senators to choose a side. Do you condemn a president for floating the idea of executing his political opponents, or do you silently condone it by saying nothing? That's why this moment matters so deeply. This isn't about symbolism. It's about forcing clarity. Here's what most people misunderstand. Resolutions like this aren't meant to change Trump's behavior. They're meant to expose everyone else's. They're designed to put senators on the record in ways that can't be walked back once election season arrives. And that's exactly why Republicans are uneasy. Vote to condemn Trump, and you invite his wrath. Refuse to condemn him, and you hand Democrats attack ads that practically write themselves. That's the tension Washington felt immediately, the unmistakable sensation of a political movement beginning to fracture from within. You can already see the cracks. Chuck Schumer, who rarely reaches for dramatic language unless he wants it to land, warned that Trump's rhetoric is like throwing a match on gasoline. That isn't casual phrasing. That's the Senate Majority Leader signaling that Congress itself feels under threat. And having watched enough of these moments, I can tell you this. When lawmakers start fearing the implications of a president's words, something fundamental shifts in the power dynamic. Now let's zoom out, because understanding how we got here makes it clear why the Senate is acting now. Trump's tariff authority stemmed from an emergency declaration tied to the trade deficit. For decades, presidents have stretched the definition of what qualifies as an emergency. But using it to impose sweeping, global tariffs was aggressive, even by modern standards. Economists hated it. Business groups hated it. And many senators privately hated it too. What kept them quiet was Trump's political influence. Opposing him carried real risk. This week showed that risk calculation changing, and you can trace it almost step by step. The first vote was closer than expected. The second brought even more tension. By the third, a crack finally widened. Mitch McConnell votes no. Rand Paul openly challenges Trump's legal justification. Democrats sense the shift and move forward with the rhetoric resolution. By the end of the week, what began as a policy dispute had snowballed into a full-scale confrontation over presidential power. That's when the commentary across the political spectrum really heated up. Some conservative writers argue the Senate is reclaiming its constitutional role. Progressive voices say Republicans are finally acknowledging the danger in Trump's rhetoric. And independents online, many of them, are simply stunned that McConnell voted against Trump at all. In my view, this feels like the first moment in a long time where Trump isn't dictating the terms of the fight. Congress is forcing Trump to respond instead of react. And that shift, however subtle it may look, is enormous in Washington. Here's why it matters. Presidents who begin losing their own party senators almost always start losing their ability to govern. It happened to Lyndon Johnson near the end of his presidency. It happened to Richard Nixon as Watergate intensified. Once senators stop fearing a president's retaliation, loyalty erodes quickly. And this vote, this resolution, this entire week carries that early turning tide energy. Now, does this mean Trump's influence is gone? No. He still commands deep support among House Republicans. He still dominates conservative media. But the Senate is the institution presidents rely on when things get legally and politically complicated. And this week, the Senate effectively told Trump, we're willing to push back. That message doesn't go unnoticed. So what does all of this mean going forward? The tariff vote is locked in. That authority is gone unless Congress decides to restore it. The resolution addressing Trump's rhetoric is heading toward a floor vote, and regardless of the outcome, it will be hugely symbolic. Republicans will continue feeling pressure from both directions. Trump's base on one side, swing state voters on the other. And Democrats will point to this week as proof that Trump's political armor isn't as impenetrable as it once seemed. This story isn't over. In fact, this feels like the beginning of the next chapter, one where Trump's power is no longer automatic, where senators decide they won't remain bystanders, and where Congress starts reasserting itself after years of waiting for someone else to make the first move.